Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. This is the podcast where I have conversations with guests from the architectural community and beyond to talk about the co-evolution of architecture and technology. In this episode, I welcome Ryan Cohen and Matt Clarey of Neoscape. Ryan oversees Neoscape's New York studio as managing director. Using his background in architecture, he develops concepts and directs award-winning films, pitches unique concepts for films that differentiate clients' projects, and then organizes and details how those films develop. Ryan works closely with other partners and principals on the strategic direction of the company. Matt is an art director who oversees Neoscape's 3D production team in New York City. His expertise is in film, creativity, lighting, and camera animation. Matt works with a team of digital artists to make sure that illustrations and films communicate visually, while also working closely with the creative directors and clients to brainstorm and translate the concepts, messages, and ideas into successful images and motion pictures. Ryan and Matt have joined me today to talk about Project Hillside. You may not know this project from its Hillside name, but you probably have seen and heard of it before, perhaps more so if you're coming from an architectural background, as architect Moshe Safdie's Habitat, an architectural landmark which was built in Montreal, Quebec, Canada in 1967 for the World's Fair. Although what was built, it turns out, was only an amended version of the overall vision from Safdie's master's thesis project at the School of Architecture at McGill University. Today, Project Hillside brings the entire vision to life through an incredibly detailed and fully immersive architectural experience, which was a collaboration between the teams of people at Neoscape, Moshe Safdie Architects, and Epic Games' Unreal Engine. In this episode, Matt, Ryan, and I talk about the thousands of hours, dozens of people, and the tools and tech it took to create the experience, as well as new potentials for user experience and storytelling within the immersive environment. Project Hillside has received positive feedback from lots of stakeholders, including Safdie himself, and is available for download so that you can experience it as well. This was a fun one. So now I bring you Ryan Cohen and Matt Clarey. Matt and Ryan, thanks for joining me today. Excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm very excited to talk about Project Hillside. You guys are both at Neoscape, and you teamed up with Epic and Moshe Safdie Architects to bring this project to life. I would love it if you would introduce the project. You guys get to pick who goes first. You can virtually arm wrestle here. Tell us about the project and just like the inception of it. How did this thing even come to be? Because as an architect myself, this project, a piece of it exists, right? A piece of it was built. You can explain it better than I can because I know of the project. I know of Safdie's work, but we've never seen this before. So jump into it. Tell us where this came from.
Yeah, certainly. So it's been pretty it's been a pretty interesting kind of dynamic of how the inception of it. So basically, Carlos Cristerna from Epic Games is a long time architectural visualization artist, and so he's basically tasked at Epic to kind of bring their gaming engine, specifically the Unreal 5.0, now 5.2 software platform, into the architectural visualization and A&E space. So certainly traditionally it's more for gaming or for feature film. So it's on him to kind of try and bring it to life in kind of our space. So he wanted to do that with a case study, and instead of just kind of doing it on his own or coming up with a fictitious project to kind of show the capabilities of the software, he's like, why don't we work with a recognized name in the architectural visualization space. We've worked together before for many years. So working with Neoscape and then using an actual project. We also have a long-term 20 plus years relationship with Safdie Architects, doing a lot of their, kind of competition work and other development work. So we wanted to kind of bring the three of us together to showcase how the software could work within the A&E and architectural visualization space. Concurrently, Safdie had just kind of released the book of all of his unbuilt projects.
Okay.
So we thought it'd be really exciting to kind of showcase a project that was unbuilt. as kind of a tool, not just to show what the tool could do, but also almost as like an informational education piece on an important piece of architecture in the architectural world. So Habitat 67 is a worldly recognized architectural project. Was
Totally
built in
iconic. Yeah.
1967,
Right.
and everybody kind of is aware of it, but they don't know, like you mentioned, nobody knows the real story of what it was
Right.
supposed to be.
Right.
So we wanted to kind of showcase the entire thing in its entity. So that's kind of how it originally came to be.
I want to ask if you guys are storytellers. You typically like script all this, you storyboard things out, you tell a visual story, you take people from point A to point B to C to D. But a game engine lets people do whatever they want. Obviously, one of the assets to this whole thing is you let people download the thing and look around, and you've got exteriors, you've got interiors, and I want to talk about all of how that all came to be. But as storytellers, what do you guys think about, and I'm sure you have Unreal experience previously, but as a storytelling device and just like letting people explore, that's two very different things, right? Or how do you see that? I'm curious just to hear how you as visualization experts think about, because as an architect, there is a key that unlocks something in somebody's brain when they get to drive, right? As a client, if you give something to a client and it's like a real-time environment and they get to look wherever they want, that's very different than like some prescriptive views that we render of our projects. And so I'm just wondering how you guys kind of see all that, as, this is what you do all the time is storytelling. So where's that take you?
Obviously they're two different kind of products almost, but what we
Hmm.
found, part of our sort of the ask for this for us was to produce a film for it, and we found that the game engine and the real-time environment made the sort of decision-making process of what story to tell a lot easier, because you can see lighting, you can see
Mm.
camera movement in real time and say, hey, is this a good shot? Is this a bad shot? Um, yes, it is giving somebody the power to walk through uh, and give them their own sort of control of the environment is definitely, it's liberating for them, but you can also kind of script out where they go when they do that, and sort of similar to like
Mm.
an open world video game style, right? And that was done as well in this project, sort of with parameters. You can't
Okay.
really go everywhere in Montreal. You can go around a certain area, and there is a separate story and narrative to be told within that. So they are two different products, but they are kind of both examples of storytelling, just done in different ways.
Yeah, right. Well, let's get back to kind of what it took to create this. So I watched that intro video. It was very well done on the site, and it kind of talked about what went into this with scanning and drones, and then obviously like pulling the design out of the archives and, digitizing that and modeling all of this stuff. And maybe you guys can talk about that. We'll get to tools later, but just like we're talking about a huge amount of data, right? You guys did a ton of photogrammetry, LiDAR scanning of the entire existing environment. And then you had to plug in this unbuilt design into that, which also had to be modeled. And again, kind of coming at this from an architectural designer point of view, we do this on every single project. We have to build the context model. We have to build our model. We have to stitch all that together. It's an ungodly amount of work. That kind of thing is getting easier. There's data sets out there that exist of really dumb volumetric buildings and things like that. But this is way more detailed than any of that. You guys took this way to the next level. So talk about all the different pieces of the puzzle that had to come together to form the final model.
One is, it's not, we didn't have to just digitize the archives, because this kind of died on the vine a little bit. Like Safdie presented a concept and there were some drawings, but then it was left at that. So the Safdie team had to actually design a lot of pieces
Oh,
so that
wow.
we could get all those details in certain areas. So it wasn't just
It w
taking
So
drawings
he had,
and
like, these really
digitizing.
loose
That was
conceptual drawings that, because it was just a concept, right? But now you're saying they actually had to take it to a way higher level of detail to actually make the design work at some level.
yeah, yeah, like all those plazas, how like the architecture meets with the landscaping and those
Mm,
kind of like reflective pools. A lot of that had to be, so the Softy team was designing again in a similar fashion that we would do on a project that's being conceived today.
mhm.
Um, so that was just an interesting point. But as far as the putting all the pieces together, I think that was part of the case study. It's certainly a different model than what we're used to, where we're charging per rendering or charging for a 90-second film, and then figuring it out. In this case, we're basically building that data set, using the Unreal Engine to kind of then, once you have that set, then you could do whatever you want with it. You could have an interactive experience. You could create as many renderings as you want. You could create a film. You can create any type of film. So it's just now we're looking at how this kind of paradigm shift in the way we think about all that content creation. So now we're basically on building the asset and then producing the content outside.
Yeah. So what are those different building blocks that you guys kind of orchestrated to make sure that this all happened? You've got context, you've got the building models, like there's tons of stuff in there.
Yeah, and we broke it down, from the context. We basically built the whole city of Montreal. um, and then so there was the context. There's obviously the architecture. There's the landscaping. There's the interior unit. We used Moshe Safdie actually had a unit there, so we wanted to kind of use his unit based
Mm,
on 1960s kind of the not the current condition, but 1960s kind of approach. And then also the dynamics of like the weather conditions, the geese and other the kind of human elements of things. So all those things happened in a parallel paths through the
There was
process.
also
very cool.
we had to build a lot of furniture and detail stuff for it. Like it wasn't it wasn't like we could kind of go on Epic's website or marketplace or whatever. We had to kind of like build sort of unique pieces of furniture, as well as rebuilding a lot of
Interesting.
the data set. Like the scan model is kind of heavy, and even with Unreal's
Yeah.
nanite and so forth, like we still had to kind of do a bunch of optimization work on that stuff. So there was a lot that came together.
And it sounds like with the tool set, I assume, because I know Jason, he's been on the show before and I used to work with him, that you guys are you mostly a 3ds Max shop? You mostly do your work in that, or is it all over the place?
It's mostly predominantly Max. Yeah, we do, but we have Unreal. We have we use a bunch of different software, but for rendering purposes, it's Max mostly.
And from Softy's side of things, are they coming to you with Rhino models? What are they building there? Okay, so they are. I see nodding going on. Yeah.
Yeah, Rhino.
Yeah, they're delivering the models in Rhino, and then we're cleaning them up and optimizing them in Max, and then bringing them in.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So this whole idea of like what Unreal is capable of, I want you guys to kind of tell that story, because I assume you have a lot of Unreal experience previous to this. This is not your first rodeo when it comes to Unreal. At least it doesn't appear to be. So give us kind of an idea. You said nanite, I know a big push with Unreal 5 and now at 5.2 is just this incredible level of detail that you can achieve in the package, because it can handle so much geometry. But you guys are using it day to day on this project. What is that really like? What is it capable of? Give people an idea of what can be done with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, nanite can ingest so many polys, right? You can have just very dense meshes that it will, just chew through. And so we did make great use of that on this project, for sure. And yeah, Unreal is capable of sort of importing really anything. It should be optimized, for frame rate reasons and things like that. But Nanite was kind of, yeah, it was a big help.
Just to add to that, more on the kind of big picture level, not on the kind of engine itself, but I think Matt actually touched on this earlier from like an art direction standpoint. Like there's a lot of efficiencies in using Unreal in this process than what we're traditionally used to. So if you can imagine the film we created, was really all done in Unreal. So we're art directing in real time. So, if we need an early morning shot, typically we would, as a creative director, I would talk to Matt as an art director of what the vision is. He would work with his team, come up with some cameras with no lighting, and we're like, okay, we like the composition. Then we would send it to the render farm. We would get it back and say like, oh, the lighting isn't right, so we have to go send it back to the render farm, and then we put it in. Then we get the shot we like. We send it to an editor. He puts it in the edit. We then look at it and so there's just it's a long chain of like events that just go back and forth and really inefficient. So now with the way we created this film, everything was done in one program. So we're, Carlos at Epic and I and Matt were like art directing in real time, saying, look at this shot. Let's tweak the camera here. It's already pre-lit. We think the lighting should come from the cloud cover, should be a little bit more cloud cover. We need a little bit more rain or less rain. It's all done in real time. So we can make decisions in the moment. And then also the editing timeline is also in there. So we can literally just kind of look at the edit and say, at this shot, we need to tweak a little bit. We pause the edit. It's in a live camera. We tweak it, and then it's all set. So it really makes efficiencies from a production standpoint and an art direction standpoint. And then on the client side of things, or the user side, we now have all these tools that are dependent on what the need is. So a film, again, it is prescribed, but it has an emotional side to it, as a music track, and it could be used on a website or something for someone to understand what the project is overall. But then there's an interactive component. It's also there that might be in a marketing center that someone can kind of walk through. So there, all those tools, all those products are coming out of the same program. So it just allows, again, a lot of efficiencies on both the back end and on the user side.
Yeah, one other thing that helped us out was the Datasmith importing plugin that we used, which you can take models in from Revit or Rhino or SketchUp, so forth. We used it for Max, but it basically allows you to bring in sort of everything that you need as a scene, including things like cameras and lights. We basically, how we set up the cameras and so forth, and this was we began in Max, actually, not in Unreal. And it's nice that we later like kind of switched over, but it's nice to be able to sort of set cameras up in the program of your choice and import them via Datasmith into Unreal. So that's another sort of method that we made great use of in this project.
I think about the architects and how you said that you had involvement from Epic. Was there somebody from Safdie also sitting at the table when you guys are talking about the art direction and the cinematography and the angles and things like that, because they probably are so intimate with the project, are they also having a voice in that conversation?
We shared things with them at certain milestones and so forth to get buy-in and so forth, but on like in the weeds on like looking at cameras in the program, they were kind of less involved in that than they might be in a newer development,
right? In a project that they're actively working on. Okay, so this whole storytelling, mood setting thing, I think is really interesting, because what we've talked about on this show before when it comes to real-time rendering is that it's no longer like this post process. It's not this thing that comes after the design or maybe at different milestones during the design. Now it is a decision-making tool in the design process. Yep. That's what is so different about real-time rendering versus conventional or traditional rendering. So it sounds like exactly the same for you guys. Like if you can walk around in a fully lit, full environment, you've got rain coming down, you've got, bloom on the highlights, and you've got geese flying in the background, and it's pretty incredibly different than what we've all kind of grown up thinking about what the rendering process was actually like. Tell us about that, because it seems like that to me is the biggest message for people who use these tools, is that it actually helps the design progress. It actually helps the story progress. It's no longer this very linear process. It's really embedded throughout now.
Yeah, part of that is a little scary. Like in side conversations with the, like Jaron Lubin at Safdie Architects, who was really kind of spearheading a lot of this, like is scary because, in historically an architect is kind of presenting a concept of an idea early on, and it's not, they're not starting with construction documents. It's
not fully baked.
Schematic design, and
Right.
it gets developed. But nowadays, particularly in the competition world, the client is looking for more and more information, so that they have to figure out more and more of the details earlier on. And then so now with real time, where you can kind of, not really, you can go anywhere, even it compounds that, where there's kind of a breakdown in the trust of just like, hey, the architects are the experts. This is a cool idea, and this is how the kind of the design concept works, and then we're gonna kind of figure it out. Now they have to figure all that stuff early on because everyone's seeing everything. So it's a little bit of just a shift in information. I just think even on the consumer side of, e-commerce and so forth, everyone is just much more educated on everything these days. All that information is out there. So that's now coming to fruition in the kind of design world as well, where the expectation of the individual learning on their own is just that much more heightened.
One other thing I could add to that, it wasn't on Hillside because this wasn't being an actively built project, but we have used Unreal in other projects to figure things like design problems out that wouldn't have gotten caught that early on in the process. Like some example would be, ductwork, going in front of something that you don't want it to go in front of, we were able to catch things like that using real-time walkthroughs. So ended up saving, I'm sure, a lot of work and money down the road.
Yeah, but so I think what Matt's mentioned is the Museum of Natural History, the new wing in New York. So it's a studio gang design, very complicated, organic kind of concrete forms. So the kind of construction kind of management of that, using a tool like this really helps the different teams kind of figure out how all the systems work together.
Yeah, this whole idea of kind of previs, right? Like the visual effects industry has been doing this forever, right? It's like, and it was traditionally like low poly, shaded render, Phong render, whatever, back in the day, of just blocking it all out and figuring this thing out, and then adding detail more and more and more. But now you're saying, like, it's really, the expectation is that detail is there as early as possible. And I think that is super interesting, right? Because design actually is a linear process. It has little loops, like feedback loops all through it. So it's not completely linear, but it does, like, this step has to happen before that step. And what we're talking about, and I think this is kind of a byproduct of building information modeling in general, which is like, it asks you to make decisions earlier. And architects they're not trained to think like that. And the software is kind of forcing people to do that. And it's even more supercharged as soon as it looks real, right? I think that is the hardest thing for people to get around still mentally, but also process workflow wise, which is because there's so many times where an architect is working on a model and they're 3 steps ahead of what they're actually presenting to the client, because they have thought ahead, but they don't want to get the conversation going in a different direction yet. They don't want someone to focus on the colors, the materials, things like that. They want them to focus on the space. And so they might turn off textures. They might turn off a lot of things before they show it to a client. But the expectation of a consumer, a client, is really
way higher than that, right? They want renderings the whole time. Do you have updated renderings? Was something that haunted us as architects, right? Because it was so difficult previously to produce renderings. And now it's not difficult to produce renderings, but we're still maybe not at the point at which they expect to see detail worked out. It is like full of little catch-22s throughout this process. How did you guys navigate that?
Yeah.
I mean, here you don't, it's different than a built project, and you're working with architects. They understand. You're working with your own team who really understands that. So maybe you didn't have to deal with this as much, but you do it on a daily basis with a lot of other clients, right? I would assume that this is something that you're kind of figuring out as you go. And if you have any tips in this section, I'm sure architects would love to hear them of how you deal with this like setting appropriate expectations throughout this process.
Yeah,
I mean,
you want to take a Matt?
I can just say it's a huge problem, like it becomes about, just setting expectations really in real time with your clients, and maybe explaining, hey, sometimes a fully real rendering is going to do more harm than good at a certain stage of the process. But you're right. It is a kind of an issue, and I like to be optimistic about it. It's almost like if you show them something that they would end up seeing later, if you show it earlier and they react positively or negatively to it, maybe that gives you a nice sort of signpost or a path to go down. But it's definitely, it's got its drawbacks as well.
Right. Well, I think there's two. One is the detail of what the consumer, the client is seeing. So I mean, we've already seen that shift from watercolor conceptual art artist renderings, which are paint the picture of what it is, to now photorealistic renderings of people scrutinizing light fixtures in like a huge auditorium. So so we've already kind of moved into that direction. This is kind of just the next level of that. So now you can kind of see everything. So it's already been kind of that shift. But I think some of the benefits of it are, again, like just understanding things that you might not have been focused on before. And that doesn't even have to be an architectural thing. That could be a master planning kind of conversation, or how things fit within the context of, instead of coming up with a perfect your hero shot view of one moment in time of, the sunniest day in June of projects, on a blue sky day, like, how does it react in the rain? How is it going to react if we're, on, somewhere else you're approaching it from somewhere else in Montreal or something like that. It's like you get to just understand things that could help beyond the architecture, could help with access, or, kind of, just other problems beyond just the design itself that you can now look at.
I mean, even lighting studies are just a good example of that, right? Like you can just see, you can move geometry around and see what what shadows are going to be cast at 9 a.m. and on this summer day, or so forth.
Yeah,
I'm laughing.
Which one of the goals of the film concept was not only to push the envelope of what the tool, what Unreal could do, but also to show that, like, we literally, typically when we have a film like this, it would be one day, an arc of the day. It might have an early morning light, midday light, and kind of evening light, but it's usually on a perfect summer day. So we wanted to see the arc of the year so that we can kind of like look at how lighting changes, look at how weather conditions and atmosphere changes. So every single shot in the film has I think there's 50 or 60 shots have a different atmospheric kind of climate scenario. So I think that was one of the goals of the film, is to show that you can look at any condition.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I was laughing earlier because you were talking about the one hero shot, and now it's just all hero shots, right? Like the whole thing is a hero shot. And so it's like, be careful what you ask for, because like, do we want to use this as a tool to its full potential? Yes. And as soon as a client sees that, the expectation is there, right? And so then it's like, from then on, now it's like, we can do anything. We can do anything anytime. This is the everything everywhere all at once kind of a thing, right? And so the tool is obviously super capable, and you talk about the different kinds of environments. And so I want to kind of talk about this now from a storytelling angle. You guys, you just kind of laid it out there that you wanted to tell the story of the 4 seasons, right? A whole year as you're kind of walking around this project. And you're used to, or we're all used to, kind of controlling and creating this one perfect mood. But the whole idea of mood and environment in rendering is always been so important to sell an image, number one, but also just to really give people a feeling of what it's like to be in space looking at a 2-dimensional image. That's changed now with something like this, where you can actually go through it and experience it in a more full way. You talk about kind of how that has shifted your approach as storytellers. Is that, I would think that this has got to be a pretty incredible, it's an incredible set of tools, but it also it kind of opens the door for you to be way more creative in the way you tell stories through visualization.
It is still a tool. I think there's still an art to it, and of what the story is and what the goals are of it, and then using it as a tool that's more efficient and kind of opens up opportunities to kind of create different things. But there still has to be some sort of creative direction initially to get you started.
I would think that there's so many options, and somebody who's just getting into this wants to throw everything at it. Like, let's put rain in there, let's put butterflies in there, let's put leaves in there. But then you guys you obviously have kind of this real sensitivity to all of what those pieces add or subtract from the experience. So is it more of a process of it just has to be you have to be very careful about what you decide to put in the scenes versus not?
Yeah, it's almost like a subtractive process, or it can get to that point where, you have so much potential of what you can do that you have to choose you have to make the right decisions to create the correct immersive environment, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're not only looking at a still 2D image of a hero shot in the rain, you're actually in the rain now. Then you can walk around and hear it potentially. So I think the question is, and it's gotta be made at some point is that the right environment to be in? Does that tell the story in the way you want it to, or does it want to be a sunny day, or does it want to be snowing or what have you? So it's almost like you start with everything and then whittle it down and craft a story out of that rather than building it up from nothing.
Which basically goes back to what I said earlier, is that we're creating a data set, and then you can create a rendering, a film, or whatever, an interactive kind of experience with it. So one of the things that we're really, personally, I'm really excited about is now that this is released to the full model we worked with all those weather conditions is released to the public. So I want to see what other people can concept and kind of come up with based on a film that they might want to create with it, or a rendering, so now it's just out there. And then, the artistry it basically is removing the roadblocks of artistry. So it's really now you can kind of, whatever you want to do, you can do it within the tool.
I wonder how Safdie's office thinks about that. It's like, you've got this perfect thing. It is exactly the vision that was there. It's the elaboration of the original vision that it makes it complete. And now somebody's going to make it into this post-apocalyptic Godzilla walking through it, kind of. That's what my son would do. I guarantee you that's exactly what he would do with it. So it is kind of it's kind of scary at the same time of what are people going to do with this thing?
Well, that was to be honest, that was a huge discussion between Epic and Safdie on that. Is this going to be brought into Fortnite where kids can blow it up and stuff? There was a lot of discussions about that, and that's why it's for education purposes. It's still out in the public, but it's for education purposes. So there are limitations on what you can do with it to keep respect of something that's is due the respect. But at the same time, I think from a Safdie's perspective, they're really excited about it from an educational standpoint. I know Jaron again mentioned he's using it. He teaches at the GSD, and he uses it as instead of a textbook to show like, hey, how housing could work, and like, so it becomes a tool, not just for marketing, but also for an educational standpoint as well.
Yeah. I'm interested in what the hard parts were. So, I mean, you guys make it look easy because you're professionals, right? And so I think this is something that, every architect out there who does design work fully understands, that there's like this, there are the pretty pictures at the end. There is the final building at the end, but oh man, what a process to actually get through. It takes years. It's toil of sweat and like all this. What were the hard parts about this? Was there anything that really stands out that made it just, you're glad that part's over?
I mean, I think it's a huge, it was a challenge. I mean, I think the whole thing was we were building things, but at the same time we were collaborating with Epic on developing the tools and for them to understand how it will be released, so the architectural visualization world can use it, in their daily kind of needs. So I think that was challenging, but also exciting at the same time. We're literally creating tools on the fly to support what we wanted to achieve. So that was one, and then just the detail for every shot, for every scenario, every climate scenario and stuff. I think just that level of detail was just maybe not so much hard as just kind of time consuming and sort of scrutinized.
Yeah. Matt, you were smiling there. What
Oh man.
what like dug its thorns into you
Yeah,
in
maybe
this process?
he's more me. I think it's easy because I'm on the
I mean, it's just a massive project. There were a lot of stakeholders, and probably the hardest thing was just creating the detail necessary to run at the right frame rates, like, because there's just a lot that goes into that. Obviously there's a lot of tools within Unreal that help you out with that, but it is still a lot of work. So, and as Ryan mentioned, we had the benefit of having Epic and others literally write tools from scratch, that maybe not from scratch, but from stuff that their engineers had done that helped us out with certain problems. But it was just, I think the hardest thing was just the scale of it, just the amount of stuff that needed to get modeled, textured, painted, so forth. So
yeah, a lot of manual work.
I think
there
there's
still.
I mean, how many units are there? So like we didn't want to just like replicate, like every unit has its own terrace. So it's not like we're just replicating the terrace 1,000 times. Like each one was individually stylized and designed and so forth. So it's just a lot of data.
Yeah, I mean that it's not just copy paste. It's not just like some cloning modifier or whatever. There, with all these instances of the same unit, there is a lot of kind of bespoke design happening, and I can see how an architect would definitely appreciate that for sure, and it shows in the final result. Talking about making tools as you went along and working with Epic to like create something out of nothing, right? To solve a problem. I think architects are getting more and more used to creating tools that automate certain pieces of their process. But I mean, can you talk about the necessity to do that? Because there are still a lot of architects who only buy the off-the-shelf software, right? They're only working with the tools that they have. And so just kind of talk about the agency that gives you. I'm sure that this is just how we do it. But a lot of architects don't think about it like that at all, right? They only use the software that they're given, basically, or that they buy off the shelf. So are there any examples of the kinds of tools that you're talking about that really made your life easier on this project, or maybe even more generally, not even specifically on this project?
Yeah, I one specific one was the street, how the street works in the experience. There's a lot of sort of there's a shaders on shaders in there that are kind of smart, and I think like put, say, water near the curbs or things like that were kind of like it. Epic helped build those and also make them interactive so that you could change the weathering on the fly as a user. It's things like that in the blueprinting process that I think, it makes Unreal, obviously for us, like so much more powerful and efficient. And I'm sure that kind of mentality to sort of code something, it's not what a standard sort of architect would want to do. But I think, it's got to be pretty, just grasshopper writing different sort of algorithms and stuff like that for programs like that. I think can make a lot of things possible. It wouldn't have been possible before. So
Yeah. You said blueprint, and I just want to point out, like, that's the name of the scripting part of Unreal, right? Just to
right, yeah,
clear up anything there.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, yeah.
Cool. The tool making thing and just the willingness from Unreal side to help develop their software along with you on this case study project, is that just par for the course? Do you guys feel like nowadays with companies who are pushing, maybe it's because they're pushing into this new market, but is this something that they're very willing to do with people who are using their tools?
I mean, I don't think we use it, and I think they do offer some like consulting and so forth as services. We don't typically do that. We obviously have been in the business a long time, so we have relationships. We've had relationships with people like Chaos Group and NVIDIA and other things that we can kind of spitball. But on like a project, project by project base, we don't typically use that. For this, it was more because we were creating the tool for the whole industry, like you were saying. So that's one of the reasons they wanted to use an actual visualization studio, that being Epic, to kind of make sure they're developing the tools that we would, want and use. So this way they are on the off the shelf kind of platform that architects could use.
Yeah. I want to just maybe start wrapping up and talk about the feedback that you guys have received from releasing this project out into the wild. What's that been like? What have you heard? What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty positive. It's been pretty exciting. I think a lot of people from different vantage points. One, from Safdie himself has been, very excited. He's been, it's one of his initial projects that he started his entire career.
He was like 23
and,
or something when he did this, right? It's
it's
been a
unbelievable.
While. Yeah.
But he even said if he had this tool when he was presenting to the, to Montreal, whatever, that they probably would have approved the bigger budget to build the whole thing.
They would have done the whole thing.
There's been that like kind of emotional,
right,
nostalgic kind of component. But in the industry, it's been very positive as far as just the level of quality that now Unreal has. I think everyone in the industry has used Unreal in certain regards, and it's been there. But it's never really kind of matched up to the other quality of some of the other platforms we use. So now people are excited to kind of see that. So it's been just a ton of positive feedback from all different areas in the industry.
How much more work was it? I mean, maybe you guys could just give us an idea of what it actually took to do. Like, how big is this team? How long did it kind of take? I mean, not anything specific, but give an idea of the undertaking that actually went into this, because it has to be a lot different than what traditional rendering services are like, because you got to build everything, right? And you're talking about all the 360 degrees of environment. You're talking about actual environmental factors like rain and all that adds up, right? But give people an idea of like what it actually takes to do something like this.
Yeah. I mean, I think the important thing to know, this took a tremendous amount of time, thousands of hours with dozens of people. And one of the reasons is we were developing things for, we were really pushing everything, really going above and beyond. But if we were thinking about it, if this was like a project where Montreal hired us to kind of build this and so forth in Unreal, in a more of a traditional fashion, we don't really think it's that much different than what we would do in traditional software packages. Because again, there's so many more efficiencies once the data set is built. So if, you know, it might be an expensive upfront cost and take a lot of work, but now, the client gets 100 renderings instead of 10, or,
right.
as many films as they want. So it's just a different model. It
Totally.
is a lot of work. It was a big team, but if we were doing this in 3D Studio Max and V-Ray, it would also be a huge team,
Yeah.
and building all those details. So
This is the
obviously
scope
there
of
was a
this
lot
is
of
way
work that
bigger
went
than
into it.
a normal project for sure. I was just interested to see what it actually took, because again, like thinking about the client, the final client, and they have no understanding of all of what it takes to put in, nor should they, right? But they're used to kind of just buying the final output and not seeing under the hood of all of this stuff that's gone into creating this. And I think now that's, to me, one of the most interesting things is you can have a client sit down next to you and you can be art directing with them at the table, and you can be allowing them to drive throughout the process. And it kind of totally shifts that conversation so that they just don't have that super high expectation at the end, but they actually see what's going on. And that including them in that process is a big advantage, I think, for that people maybe aren't exploring fully, because this is a paradigm shift in how to do the work.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer it specifically as far as it was a lot of work. I mean, we
Yeah.
worked on this for close to a year and a half, not everybody full time on it, obviously, but like there were, thousands of hours.
Yeah.
I was just going to say another byproduct, which is interesting, is if you can imagine this is like they were trying to approve this, using this tool, and there are a lot of stakeholders that have, if you just plop this down into an existing context of a city and with a couple of renderings, and it's a huge kind of monolithic project, it could scare a lot of people. But by allowing them to then interact with it and explore it on their own, it kind of just takes some of that fear out of it, so that people can kind of understand a little bit more as well. So it's not just the educational purposes or the design purposes, but the just the everyday kind of local person that might be impacted by this. They can kind of also understand things, what's important to them. So I think there's value. There's a additional value beyond just kind of creating renderings or film and so forth.
Matt, you got something there? You wanna add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to drill down on an example for that, it's just, so many projects get hung up at like the public is like, what is this going to look like from my house? Is this going to ruin my view? And with a tool like this, when you have the entire data set, you can show them, hey, this is going to be fine, and it can pass all those public hearing processes that much more easily. So there is a lot of work and of course, Hillside was thousands of hours. I think one of the big reasons it was thousands of hours is because it's a public facing model, so every single thing about it had to be like perfect. If we were to do this for some other, like a different for a different client or different purpose, it doesn't, I don't think these things have to take as long as they did. There are so many tools that Epic has built, like one of them, Lumen, the real-time kind of lighting system, in Unreal really takes all of the time out of lighting. Like you can set up anything you want, very quickly. So, as Ryan said, it's probably the same amount of time that it would take to do a traditional sort of viz film that we do. But at the end of the day, you have this asset that can be used for so many different purposes that it almost multiplies the value of what you're doing, your time investment. So yeah, I think obviously everybody's pretty excited about what you can do, and once you have a complete data set like that, because it's not just make beautiful images and films.
Yeah. Traditionally, renderings are used for an approval process, right? And they might show up in an internal memo. They might show up on a job site sign someday. But like you said, they don't have to be totally public facing. They were used to get to the next phase of the project. And this is completely different than that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because this is there's a different context to this, and it does make a difference when you're kind of talking about it. And I think one of the interesting things that you brought up, Ryan, was this idea of, if this was a thing that they could have used to help tell the story of what Habitat 67 in all of its full glory would have been like, it does, like, you can't just give the model to anybody and just say, here it is, it's done, and
Right.
it answers all it does not speak for itself, right? It still requires the element of the creative direction of the story to introduce it to people, so that the conversation can get to the point where you can start to address the various concerns that different people are going to have depending on where they live or how it affects them personally, right? In their building that they go, because you could see like this giant thing this is like from Star Wars, right? When they fly over Coruscant or whatever. And it's like, the whole planet is city. And like, that's scary, right? There's this giant thing that's just plopped down into Montreal. I can see people freaking out about that. And it's tall, it's big, it's massive. But at the same time, like, if you approach it as a storyteller, you can totally control that situation in a much more nuanced way to really tell the story about it and put people at ease, take that fear away. Like, that's just something as a designer, you learn over time, is like, you learn how to get people's toes dipped into the water before you shove them in, right? Like that, this is a process. The storytelling is part of the process. It's a really important part of the process to get, the traditional kind of approval thing happening, but it is an important point to make, and that still matters. And that to me is still like this very human element to this very digital intensive, process.
Yeah, and it's a great point, because even in this case, Moshe Safdie in his head knew it was going to be open and these like great plaza, and the scale of it, even though in an elevation it looks huge and monolithic, but now that, like, that scares people. But now if you're in there and you're looking around, you see it's mostly light coming in, and it's open, and it's but so it's scalable for the human condition, which you might not get that from a rendering or from an elevation. So it just allows people to learn from.
Yep. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about with this project that you guys think would be worth mentioning? I'm sure that I haven't touched on all of it, but if there's anything else, I would love for you to offer it up and talk about it. If not, that's fine too.
I think from my perspective, I think we touched on, again, everything from internal processes to tool sets to storytelling to the technical side of things. So
yeah,
I think
okay.
you did a good job covering the whole project.
Yeah, maybe the one thing I'd just add is
Go
the
for it.
potential for the user interface side of things with Unreal, because you can, it is an immersive environment and people can walk around at their own pace and choose where to go, but you can kind of direct them with information very easily using that kind of user interface and blueprint process. And I think that's done on the online version of Habitat, where you hear Moshe's voice, you can open this, change the time of day, change the weather, that kind of thing. So you can use Unreal as an information tool in that way, using that user interface and tools like that.
I love that you brought that up, because the whole idea of, like I said earlier, the model doesn't necessarily speak for itself, but you can add elements, a layer of information into this to help guide somebody to do something. And I think that is one of the real benefits of this fully immersive thing. If you think about it from that perspective, you don't just sit somebody down in front of a model and walk away, but you've actually kind of thought it through to guide them. And you can basically create virtual tour guides per se, and that really does help people kind of understand the project a little bit better if you're not sitting right there next to them while they're going through it.
Yeah. And it's storytelling. It's just a different kind of storytelling, right? It's directing people to
Right.
go a certain path, take a certain path rather than choosing edit points in a film. But it's still the same,
Right. Right.
story.
Yeah. Well, final question here is, how good does it feel to be done with this? Was this a
It
big
feels
load
good, but
off?
at the
This is
same time,
a long one.
yeah, it was exciting to see it released. I think it's been really exciting to see again the recognition and the everyone's getting a taste of it. So that's been really exciting to see. I think from the artist side of things, we never got to the snow season, which is something, we wanted to get to. And or some other kind of human elements that from the creative direction up front that we, for whatever reason, didn't get there. So there's always that kind of phase two, or like what we could have done like more of. But that's in any, I think, art form, that people that are in the weeds on things can always see kind of the next step. But it's definitely really a relief to kind of get it out there and have other people kind of experience it the way we've been looking at it for a year and a half plus.
Yeah, it feels great, and it feels awesome to, see all the reactions to it, and generally everything's been super positive, so it's awesome.
Great. Have you guys seen there's a YouTube channel out there where they take assets and, stylized assets from various old films, and they turn them into Wes Anderson. If Wes Anderson had directed them, so there's like Star Wars and there's a few of them now, and they're really funny. I could totally see this being the backdrop for this new kind of style of short films on YouTube, where I could see like, what does this look like in Blade Runner? What is this in the Star Wars universe? Like, people can take this and make their own stories out of it. And what if this was, it could be really fun to watch, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what other people come up with.
That's cool. Well, you guys, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. And I want to point people into the call to action here, I think, is to download this, right? You can tell everybody what they're actually downloading, because it's a big download, but what can they do with it?
You can download the model, and you can open it up and walk around in Unreal, and so you get all of that functionality. You can also go to the website and pixel stream, sort of move around the model in a browser if you don't have a computer that can handle it. And yeah, you can also watch the film as well.
The presets and so forth, they're in there of each lighting scenario and so forth. So you can kind of adjust anything you want and add rain or more rain or less rain or clouds or sun, or
that's cool.
You can really, you have full access into everything that we created.
What would you say the kind of system requirements are for getting decent performance in a model like this on a laptop or a desktop?
I'd have to get back to you with that. I don't want to say the wrong thing. You definitely need a good graphics.
It's just like download it and try.
Yeah.
Download it and try it. If not, you do the website version.
Yeah. And I think there are different, if you don't have the highest end graphics card, you can run a version of it, I believe. But let me get back to you on that, because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. I just don't want somebody to be disappointed. I could see kind of pretty decent requirements being necessary to get a good performance out of it, because it is such a huge model. But like you said, there is the pixel stream version that you can access through the browser, which is really cool too. So I'll put a link in the show notes so everybody can go to that and download it. And again, thank you guys so much for taking the time to have this conversation. It's very cool to see this happening out there in AEC space, combined with your visualization expertise and with the tools that Epic is making. It's this kind of perfect case study to show what's possible. And I know you guys push the limits, and not everybody is at the level you are, but it really gives people an idea. I think once they see what's possible, then it unlocks the next level in their brain to say, oh yeah, well, maybe we can try that too, or whatever. So that to me is very exciting in the world of architectural visualization.
Awesome.
All right, guys.
Well, thanks for having us. This has been
Yeah, thanks so much, Evan.
Thank you.